Well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 7 English lesson on point of view. And before we go on to our lesson on point of view, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 7. And then once we've selected the subject of language arts, grade 7, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of point of view. So we're basically going to find out what point of view means, right? Especially in the text or within a sentence, in a story, right? So chapter is point of view. The subject that we are doing today is English Language Arts, grade 7. And the lessons that we are focusing on under the chapter of point of view is to identify the narrative point of view or the narrative point of view, right? So we will basically identify the narrative point of view. So some people say it's a narrative, some people say it's narrative. And we are doing our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. All right, so when it comes to point of view, right, the narrator of a story is the voice that is telling or narrating. Like if you think of a play, right? So sometimes either with a play or sometimes it can be in a story or a book that you're reading, you'll have a narrator of a story. And he or she is the voice that is either telling or narrating this specific story. And a narrator's point of view is the perspective from which a story is told. So the narrator's point of view is the perspective from which a story is told. And a story can be told in three main points of view. So there are three main points of view, which is basically in the first person, can be in the second person, and it can be in the third person. So within the first person, right, the narrator the narrator describes events from his or her own perspective. So it's in the first person, the narrator describes events from his or her own perspective. right? That's first person. It's basically what he or she thinks of the story or thinks of whatever that's going on. It's the narrator's perspective. With also the first person or within the first person, narrators, they use first person pronouns. So they use first person pronouns like I, me, we, or us because they are basically telling the events or describing the events from their own perspective, right? So if you are describing something within within the first person, then it means that you're describing things from events that is your own perspective. So you're going to use things like I, me, we, or us. And if we look at an example, right, of it being in first person, then it says, I waded slowly across the river, holding my backpack high above the water. So it's an event that is being described, right, from the narrator's own perspective, right? Meaning that I waded slowly across the river, right? If it's more than one, we can say we waded, right? Holding our backpacks high above the water. But in this case, it's like one person. So it says, I waded slowly across the river, holding my backpack high above the water. So this is in first person. It is where the narrator describes events from his or her own perspective, and they use pronouns such as I, me, we, or us. Right? Then we have in second person, right? So in second person, the narrator casts the reader as an actor within the story. So if you are the one reading, then you will basically be casted as a character within the story. So in second person, the narrator casts the reader as a character in the story. So second person narrators, they use second person pronouns, which is you or your. So they're using you and they're using your. And we say that the second person narrator or the second person, the narrator casts the reader as a character within the story. And they use pronouns such as you and your. And if we look at an example, right, of it being in second person, then it says you turn the page in anticipation, eager to find out where the story will lead. So which means that you as the reader becomes the character within the story. Because remember, you are reading, and it's almost like it's if it is being the narrator is telling the story to you. The narrator is talking about you. You turn the page in anticipation, eager to find out where the story will lead. Right? So that is within the second person. Then we have the third person, right? But before we go into the third person, remember, just to go a bit back, we say that the narrator of a story is the voice that is telling or narrating a story, right? And a narrator's point of view is the perspective from which a story is told. And we have 3 points in which the story can be told: first person, second person, or in third person. And we see that in first person, the narrator gives his or own perspectives of the events that is taking place. So the narrator describes the events from his or her own perspective. And the narrator uses pronouns such as I, me, we, or us. And then we have in the second person, right, where the narrator calls you as the reader as a character within the story. And within second person, the narrator uses second person pronouns such as you and your, right? And that basically calls you as the reader as a character within the story. All right. So now within the third person, right, the narrator describes events from the perspective of an outside observer. Remember, in the first person, the narrator describes events from his or her own perspective. In the second person, the narrator describes events as if it's like he casts you as the reader as within the as a character within a story. But now within the third person, the narrator describes events from a perspective of an outside perspective. It's like almost like somebody else is observing from outside and they're giving their input. And with the third person narrators, they use third person pronouns such as he, she, him, and her. They even use characters' names, right, within the third person. So we say third person, the narrator describes events from the perspective of an outside observer. And they use the third person pronouns such as he, she, him, and her. Second person uses the pronouns such as you and your. And first person uses the pronouns such as I and me, we or us. And with a third person limited point of view, right? The observer's point of view or the observer's knowledge is limited to what a single character knows and feels, right? So with a third person limited point of view, remember we said that with third person, it is basically events from the perspective of an outside observer. And with a third person limited point of view, meaning you don't have that much knowledge, right? The observer's knowledge is limited to what a single character knows and feels. Because generally, any outside person is not going to know everything, right? They're only going to know limited things. It's the same as an outside person coming into your home, for example, and thinking that they know everything about your home or your house or the things that is going on. But in actual fact, they're not there every single day from day to night to basically know whatever that's going on. So, which means that they have limited knowledge of whatever that's going on, for example. And if we look at an example of a third person limited point of view, then it says Maria wondered whether her new neighbor's laugh was genuine. Because sometimes we laugh with people, we are friends with people, but our friends are actually not that genuine, right? Or you don't spend the whole entire day with a person to really see, like, is this person actually laughing like this? Is this actually his or her genuine laugh? Or when he or she is with whoever, do they even laugh the same way, for example? So which means that you do not know the person that well in this case. Because Maria wondered whether her new neighbor's laugh was genuine, which means that she don't know her neighbor. Her knowledge is limited, or her point of view is limited of her neighbor. And then also with a third person, omniscient. So with a third person omniscient point of view, or omniscient point of view, the observer is all knowing and often reveals multiple characters, thoughts, and feelings. So with a third person omniscient, right, point of view, we can then say that the observer is all knowing and often reveals multiple characters, thoughts, and feelings. So it's not limited, but they know way more. You'll be able to know if the love is genuine or not, if the person's character is genuine or not, right? For example, Bernard was confident that the model rocket would launch without a hitch, but Nina had her doubts. So Nina had a limited point of view, whereas Bernard was highly confident, right? Because he probably did thorough investigation, thorough calculations. He made thoroughly sure that, and I is confident that this model rocket would launch without any hitches. Whereas Nina has a doubts, which means that she has a limited point of view. All right. So we see that with point of view is the narrator of a story, who is the voice that is telling or narrating a story. And a narrator's point of view is the perspective from which a story is being told. And the three main point of views are first person, which describe events from his or her own perspective, right? And they use first person pronouns such as I or me, we or us. And then we have second person, right? Where the narrator casts the reader as a character in the story. And the second person narrator uses second person pronouns such as you and your. And then we have third person, right? It's where the narrator describes events from an outside observer, right? And they use pronouns such as he, she, him, and her. Or they can use the characters' names. And then we have third person limited point of view, and we have third person omniscient point of view. If the third person limited point of view It basically describes that the observer's knowledge is limited to what a single character knows and feels. You're not 100% sure. Whereas with the omniscient, you are 100% sure that you know what you know is true, or you know more about something, right? So the observer is all knowing and often reveals multiple characters' thoughts and feelings within a story, right? So this is point of view. So now let's go to aplusstudents.ca. And remember, whatever we do not finish within the test that we are going to be doing, you are going to complete that on your own. And we basically described already what point of view is, and we also described first person, second person, as well as third person, right? So now here we're going to say which point of view does the narrator use within the passage, right? Is it going to be first person, second person, or is it going to be third person, right? And keeping in mind the pronouns that is being used. Remember we said first person, the pronoun is I, me, we, and us. Second person, the pronouns is you and your. And third person, the pronouns are he, she, him, her, as well as the narrator's names, right? All right. So Brian shrugged, but it ate at him. What they were going to do proved nothing. They were playing a game, and it struck him that Derek did that. His whole life was that. He knew it was unfair to think of a man or of the man that way. He didn't, after all, know him very well, but he acted that way, like it was all a game, and Derek was approaching the whole business that way. Just a game. So we now need to say which point of view does the narrator use the passage? I'm going to read it again. Brian shrugged, but it ate at him. Him. Look at the pronoun him. What they were going to do proved nothing. They were playing a game, and it struck him that Derek did that. His whole life was that. He knew it was unfair to think of a man that way. He didn't, after all, know him very well, but he acted that way, like it was all a game, and Derek was approaching this whole business that way. All right, so if we look at that text or the passage, right? We now need to say which point of view does the narrator use within the passage? Is it first person, second person, or third person? And remember, we said first person, it's the narrator's own perspective. Second point, the second person is where the narrator basically describes you as the reader as one of the characters. And third person, it basically shows the point of view from somebody that's an outsider. So it's an outsider's perspective. And if we look at the pronouns that is being used, are we using first person, second person, or third person? And if we look at the specific pronoun that is being used, right? Remember, we said in third person, the pronouns that is being used within the third person is he, she, him, and her, or the characters' names, right? And in this case, a character's name is being used, like for example, Derek, but also it says, but it at him, right? So him giving us the idea that this is third person. So this gives us the idea that this is third person. Third person point of view. Right? You see that the pronoun is either he, she, him, or her, or a character's name. So third person. And here it says the passage shows a third person limited point of view, right? So even if you just say third person, that is correct. You don't have to say third person limited or omniscient. But it shows here in the passage that we just read that this is a third person limited point of view where the narrator describes event from the perspective of an outside observer and they use third person pronouns. And it shows that the observer's knowledge was limited to what a single character knows or feels. All right, so now we're going to look at another one. It says, which point of view does the narrator use within the passage? The circus looks abandoned and empty. But you think perhaps you can smell caramel wafting through the evening breeze beneath the crisp scent of the autumn leaves. The people around you are growing restless from waiting. A sea of shuffling feet murmuring about abandoning the endeavor in search of someplace warmer to pass the evening. You yourself are debating departing when it happens. So now we need to say which point of view does narrator use within the passage? First person point of view, second person point of view, or third person, either limited or omniscient point of view. And try to also look at the pronouns, which will basically guide you to say if it's either first person, second person, or third person. All right, so if we look at this passage, right, then we can say that the narrator uses second person, second person point of view, right? Because they're casting you as a character. So we can say that they're using second person point of view. right? So now we're going to see how he uses the second person point of view, right? So here it says that the passage shows a second person point of view. The narrator casts the reader as a character within the story, which I had mentioned, right? Now let's look at the next one, and then we're going on to our test, right? Gary Fulcher grabbed his arm as he went by. Gonna run today? Jess nodded. Gary smirked. He thinks he can beat me, the dumbhead. At the thought, something jiggled inside Jess. He knew he was better than he had been last spring. Fulcher might think he was going to be the best. Now that Wayne Peters was in sixth, but he just planned to give old Fulcher a little surprise come noon. We now need to say which point of view does the narrator use within the passage. First person point of view, second person point of view, or third person point of view. And even look at the pronouns that is being used within this passage. All right, so if we say which point of view does the narrator use within the passage, right? If we look at all the names that is being used, the pronouns that is being used, saying that he grabbed his arm, right? He, it's either he's or he that is being used, right? We can say that this is third person point of view. This is from an outside perspective. So third person point of view, right? And let's see how. Yes, so it says it's a third person limited point of view, and the narrator describes the event from the perspective of an outside observer using the third person pronouns, such as either he or him, right? As well as the names of characters. And the observer's knowledge is limited to what a single character knows or feels, right? All right, so now we're going on to our test. And before we go on to our test, we said that point of view, right? With the narrator of a story is the voice that is telling or narrating a story. And the narrator's point of view is the perspective from which a story is told. And it can be told in the first person, second person, or third person, right? We said first person, the narrator describes events from his own perspective, and they would use first person pronouns such as I, me, we, and us. Second person, the narrator casts the reader as a character within the story, and they use second person pronouns such as you and your. And then third person point of view, it's the observer's knowledge. The observer's knowledge is limited. Wait, before we go into the limited as well, the omniscient, right? Third person, it basically describes the event from an outsider perspective, right? The perspective of an outside observer. And the narrator uses third person pronouns such as he, she, him, and her, as well as the characters' names. And with third person, we have limited point of view as well as omniscient point of view. right? So now we're going on to our test, right? Where we are going to identify the narrator's point of view, whether in the first person, second person, or third person. So now we need to say which point of view does the narrator use within the passage. The bus is coming now, and you are staring at the tips of your black shoes. You've got to be prepared. You put your hand in your pocket, search among the coins, and finally take out 30 centavos. Is it centavos? You've got to be prepared. You grab the handrail. The bus slowed down but doesn't stop and jump abroad. So now we need to say which point of view it is. Is it the first person, second person, or third person? So the bus is coming now, and you are staring at the tips of your black shoes. You've got to be prepared. You put your hand in your pocket, search among the coins, and finally take out the centavos. You've got to be prepared. You grab the handrail, the bus slows down and doesn't stop and jump abroad. All right, so if we look at the which point of view it is, we can say this is within the second point of view, second person point of view, right? The narrator mainly uses pronouns such as you and your, and is speaking in the perspective of you being one of the characters within the story. So second person point of view is correct. My aunt Helen was my favorite person in the whole world. She was my mom's sister. She got straight A's when she was a teenager, and she used to give me books to read. My father said that the books were a little too old for me, but I liked them. So he just shrugged and let me read. So if we look at this one, right, this story or passage, sorry, are we reading it within the first person, second person, or is this the third person? It says my aunt Helen was my favorite person in the whole world. So is it in the first person, second person, or third person? All right, so if we choose the correct point of view, we can say this is in the first person point of view. The narrator's own perspective and uses pronouns such as I, me, my, right? So first person. And the first one is correct. Well done. We need to say which point of view does narrator use within the passage. When you find your seat, you glance at the businessman sitting next to you and decide he's almost handsome. This is the second leg of your trip from Miami to Casablanca, and the distance traveled already has muted the horror of the last 2 months. So when you find your seat at glance, when you find your seat, you glance at the businessman next to you and decide he's almost handsome, right? This is the second leg of your trip from Miami to Casablanca, and the distance traveled already has muted the horror of the last 2 months. So we now need to say, is this the first person, second person, or third person? Try to even look at the pronouns to make it more easier. So we need to say, is this first person, second person, or third person? All right, so we will then say this is the second person, right? This is the second person point of view. Uses pronouns such as you and your, and basically uses you as a character within the passage or story. All right, let's look at the last one. Which point of view does the narrator use within the passage? The circus looks abandoned and empty, but you think perhaps you can smell caramel wafting wafting through the evening breeze beneath the crisp scent of the autumn leaves. The people around you are growing restless from waiting. I see shuffling feet, murmuring about abandoning the endeavor in search of some place warmer to pass the evening. You yourself are debating departing when it happens. We need to say, is this first person, second person, or third person? And basically, within this passage, we can say this is second person point of view. All right, so this is now the end of our lesson on point of view, right? We said that the point of view is basically the narrator's idea or perspective of, whatever that's happening within a passage. And then we have first person, second person, as well as third person. First person is the narrator's own point of view, right, or own perspective. Second person, it shows it's where the narrator basically uses you as a character within the story. And third person is where the narrator basically gives the perspective of somebody that's almost like an outside observer, right? All right, so this is now the end of our lesson on point of view. Thank you very much, grade sevens, for joining the class. And I really hope you're going to have a good day further. Goodbye.